Sean Diddy Combs has been found not guilty concerning sex trafficking and racketeering by a mixed jury. Tyrone Bowman live. I'm going to bring you some live coverage that was recorded by ABC News. And they're going to be talking about how the verdict came about and how the jury reached their decision. Had Mr. Combs been found guilty of sex trafficking and racketeering, he would have probably be spending decades, if not life in prison, probably without the possibility of parole. So what exactly did they find him guilty of? You're going to find out, like I'm about to find out right now. This is Tyrone Bowman Live. Welcome to the program on this afternoon. So let's watch this together. And let me just say this before I start playing the video. I gather a lot of news from a lot of news sources. And when I bring them before the camera, it's not for, this is not clickbait. This is not profiting. I don't profit off of anything that I show, okay? This is for information purposes only. All right, let's go to ABC News and find out exactly how this came about. And Mr. Combs may be walking free by this afternoon.
Was Combs' enterprise. So again, linking that enterprise to it. When we're dealing with the witness tampering, I don't think it was as strong. You're dealing with D-Rock and the messages to Mia. I don't think it was that strong. Also dealing with Jane and the recording, that KK recorded Sean Combs and Jane having that conversation. The forced labor, I think it was probably one of the weakest counts, dealing with the predicate acts. And again, that's dealing with Mia and the long hours that they work, but also having put Cassie working as a sex slave pretty much. When you're dealing with the drug distribution, I thought that was the strongest count of the predicate acts having to deal with racketeering conspiracy, because we know the common thread that narcotics was given to Cassie and to Jane on more than one occasion, and all you have to prove is one incident within the possession with intent to distribute. You have the personal assistant saying that they were asked also to bring narcotics to give it to Sean Combs so it can be delivered during the free calls. And even Brendan Paul even said that on one occasion, Sean Combs had him try out some narcotics, and just giving him the narcotics to try out is sufficient to meet that count.
Rena, what can you tell us about
Before I continue, let me just say this. The prosecution, they overplayed their hand in charging Mr. Combs. The racketeering charge, the sex trafficking charge, they brought in the RICO Act that mainly is used for mobsters. And as a result of it, the jury did not buy what the prosecution was saying during the course of the 7 weeks that they had him basically being vilified as they were presenting their case. They should have charged him with the main thing that they could have gotten a major conviction on. They never charged him with domestic violence, which could have been easy to prove because they showed the video, but they never went down that road. So the district attorney, the prosecutors, they dropped the ball when it comes to this case. Nevertheless, Mr. Combs was found not guilty of sex trafficking and not guilty of racketeering. Let's go back to ABC News.
reaction in the courtroom?
Well, Diane, we know that it has been very tense in that courtroom. It has been emotional. Combs yesterday, when there was a partial verdict, we saw him wiping tears from his eyes. He was slumped over in his chair. He was hugging his attorneys. Just a short time ago, a couple of minutes ago, we saw his family arrive back at the courthouse here. They have been here really every single day of this trial. Now, we are told that Combs was in the courtroom this morning for about 30 minutes. He was mostly reading a book, jotting down notes, and he spent most of the deliberations in a separate location. We are told, though, that everyone is making their way back to the courtroom. Lawyers from both sides, prosecutors are filling the front row of the courtroom. The judge and the jury are not inside at this point. Before this morning, though, Combs shared a moment with his family. He bowed his head. He led them in prayer. He said, "Bless this jury, bless my family." He told them to stay strong. They locked hands and they prayed. And he also hugged his defense attorney, Brian Steele, before heading to that separate location where he has been for most of these deliberations. So this is clearly a big moment. He's about to learn his fate that these 12 New Yorkers have decided for him.
Bernardo, one of the things the jury asked for in one of their several notes was to look again at Cassie's testimony about that 2016 hotel attack. That was the video of the attack was caught on surveillance of Sean Combs assaulting her, kicking her, dragging her through a hall.
Hold on for a minute, ladies and gentlemen. I gotta make sure I got the right video here. All right, let's go back.
Way, and they were asking to see the testimony where she testified that she had was trying to escape one of those freak-offs when he beat her and dragged her back into that hotel room. Do you read the tea leaves there, or what does that tell you in general, that they wanted to see that testimony again, and how critical do you think that event and that video was in this case?
And let's be clear, Diane, but for that Intercontinental video, we wouldn't be here today. I can honestly say, having been a prosecutor.
Oh,
for
I have to
16
interrupt you.
years.
We're going to a special report with the network. Let's listen to Kira Phillips.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kira Phillips. We're coming on the air because the jury has now reached a full verdict in the racketeering and sex trafficking trial of music mogul Sean Diddy Combs. Jurors had the court scrambling yesterday, you may remember, when they sent a note to the judge saying they had reached a partial verdict on 4 of the 5 counts, but they were stuck on the remaining racketeering conspiracy charge. The judge telling them to keep an open mind. Well, deliberation resumed this morning for a third day. The Combs trial has been going on for nearly 2 months. As you know, graphic testimony, disturbing sexually explicit images. And during yesterday's deliberations, the jury asked for a transcript of ex-girlfriend Cassie Ventura's testimony about the 2016 hotel attack that you're seeing here on your screen that was captured on surveillance video in that hotel. That video showing Combs kicking and dragging Cassie in a hallway. Cassie testified she was trying to escape one of those so-called freak-offs when Combs beat her and dragged her back into the room. The jury made up of 8 men and 4 women. Combs has pleaded not guilty to all the charges. Let's get right to our chief investigative correspondent, Aaron Katursky. He is outside the courthouse there in Lower Manhattan. Aaron, I understand now that Sean Combs has entered the courtroom.
Sean Combs is now seated at the defense table, Kira, with his attorneys. Judge Arun Subramanian has just taken the bench, instructing everyone in the courtroom to maintain decorum when the verdict is reached. It comes after about 14 hours of deliberations over 3 days, and it comes after the jury became stuck on the top charge of racketeering conspiracy, saying they had reached a unanimous verdict on 4 of 5 counts, sex trafficking and transportation for the purposes of prostitution, but had become stuck when it came to the racketeering conspiracy charge. And it's a complicated charge because it required the jury to believe that Combs, if they were to convict, was the leader of a criminal enterprise who relied on his assistants and bodyguards and other employees to commit crimes with him. And there were 8 to choose from. The jury would have to find that Combs agreed to commit at least 2 of those 8 so-called predicate acts. But the judge at the time did not take a partial verdict. He instructed the jury to go back at it. It was too soon to give up. And here now, on the 3rd day of deliberations, after about 14 hours, Kira, the jury has reached a verdict.
And Aaron, I understand that, as I'm being told now, the jury is entering the courtroom. Give us a little bit of color from early this morning. Apparently, Sean Combs was allowed a moment with his family. They prayed together. Tell us about that, Aaron.
This was not the first time that Sean Combs has prayed in the courtroom. The judge was not on the bench. He asked the marshals for permission to speak with his family. There's an entire row in the gallery, the second row of the gallery reserved for Combs' family members, his mother, twin daughters and sons, all there, other family members in the courtroom as well. And he asked them to hold hands, bow their heads, and pray. And that's when Sean Combs asked for blessings for his family and also for the jury. That jury is now entering the courtroom, Kira.
And I'm told the jury is seated now. Brian Buckmeyer, our legal contributor, I want to bring you in on this. I'm going to have you comment on that in just a second. But let's talk about the RICO charge, the toughest charge here, but would bring the strongest penalty, right?
In a sense, yes. So with the racketeering conspiracy, it does have a possibility of a life sentence. The reason why I say in a sense is because the sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, that sentencing guideline has a minimum of 15 years to life. So life is a possibility whether or not RICO is met. But I think with the RICO, there's an added issue as well as to automatic forfeiture, because when you are convicted of a RICO conspiracy, the government isn't just looking to incarcerate an individual who participates or, in this case, is allegedly the head of that racketeering conspiracy, but also to dismantle that conspiracy or that RICO from a financial standpoint. So all the stuff we heard about Sean Combs' homes and his enterprise and the bank accounts that were used for the sex trafficking and transportation to engage in prostitution, if convicted of racketeering conspiracy, that can also be dismantled or taken by the federal government.
And Brian, talk about some of the charges that were dropped. Is it being read right now? Okay, let's go right into the courtroom. Okay, all right. It is being read right now, I am told. Aaron, let's take it back to you as we are now hearing from the judge inside the courtroom.
So the jury, Kira, had to fill out this form, which lists the charges, proven, not proven, the predicate crimes, and whether Sean Combs is not guilty or guilty. On count one, the racketeering conspiracy charge, Sean Combs has been found not guilty of racketeering conspiracy, perhaps the most complicated charge for the jury to understand. The count one had provided for a number of predicate acts, but the jury does not have to get into that because they have found Sean Combs not guilty of leading a criminal enterprise, not guilty of racketeering conspiracy. They will now move to the other four counts, two of them on sex trafficking and on and we have not guilty now on count two, which was sex trafficking of Cassandra Ventura. Sean Combs has been found not guilty of sex trafficking when it comes to his former girlfriend, Cassie Ventura. There was a real debate that the jury heard over the course of the last 2 months about consent and coercion and the complications of deciding when an 11-year relationship between Combs and Cassie Ventura may have become a criminal one. And the jury decided it was not criminal sex trafficking when Sean Combs committed what his attorneys freely admitted was domestic abuse, as you saw in that video. He has been found not guilty now on racketeering conspiracy, not guilty on sex trafficking of Cassie Ventura. He has been found guilty on count three, transportation for the purposes of prostitution. He has also been found guilty on count five, transportation for the purposes of prostitution. These charges carry a maximum penalty of up to 10 years in prison, so we do have a split verdict. Sean Combs has been found not guilty of racketeering conspiracy, not guilty of sex trafficking Cassandra Ventura, but he has been found guilty on 2 counts of transportation for the purposes of prostitution. And we're waiting for one more count, the sex trafficking of Jane. And just now the jury has decided that Sean Combs is not guilty of sex trafficking his former girlfriend who testified under the pseudonym Jane. So the jury has now believed that the relationships that Sean Combs had with his former girlfriends, Cassie Ventura and a woman who testified under the pseudonym Jane, were not criminal, did not involve sex trafficking. All Sean Combs has been convicted of here is transportation for the purposes of prostitution. And Kira, those did seem to be the most evident crimes that Sean Combs committed. We heard testimony from the male escorts. The jury heard about the cash that they were paid, and as prosecutors told them, they were not in those hotel rooms for scintillating conversation. Sean Combs guilty of transportation for the purposes of prostitution, not guilty of racketeering conspiracy, not guilty of sex trafficking. Kira?
All right, let's put this in perspective now that we know where Sean Combs has been found guilty and non-guilty. Let's put into perspective, Brian, on time he will serve. What are we looking at now with regard to years? Of course, we should point out there will be an appeal. He's got plenty of money to do that. But let's take it from where it stands right now.
Kira, I'm still trying to wrap my mind around this. I'm not even sure if I would say there would be an appeal, because for Sean Combs and his defense team, this is a massive win. 3 of the counts that had a life sentence possibility are gone. When it comes to transportation to engage in prostitution, the minimum is nothing. There's a theoretical possibility that he walks out on probation. Now, do I think that's going to happen? No, but the max is 10 years. Even if you were to take both sentences, and he's not going to get 10 years, they're going to look at his criminal history, mitigating circumstances, aggravating circumstances, and I would assume that he gets somewhere in the middle ground, maybe like 3 to 5 years, 3 to 6 years, possible through that sentencing range for each count. Sean Combs going to trial where he was facing life and being able to walk out with something under 10 years, well under 10 years possibly, that is a victory. Will he appeal? Sure, that's his right to do so, but I don't see an appeal here. I think you take this as a win. You serve the few years that you may get, and you be happy that you didn't get life. I'm somewhat shocked as to the trafficking for Cassie. I thought that might have been a stronger case for the government. I didn't think that they had the RICO, and I definitely didn't think they had the Jane trafficking. But this is, I think in only so many words, and I keep saying it, I think this is a positive result for Sean Combs and his team.
I'm being told now Combs is hugging his lawyer at this very moment. Clearly, he's seeing it as you are seeing it as well. We should point out, Brian, let's look at bigger picture here. He is a music producer. He created a brand around himself. He was a big part of bringing hip hop into the mainstream. There is an entire entertainment business side to this. How do you see, from your experience, this win, as you are saying, for Sean Combs? How will it impact his business empire?
I think, for lack of a better term, there's always going to be a blemish on Sean Combs' career. I think people are going to look at this in 2 different ways. In one way, they're going to say that Sean Combs probably had a history of getting into trouble with the law and somehow getting out from underneath it. They're going to look at past events through both civil and criminal complaints and say, you know what, he's always had good lawyers or whatever it may be, and he's gone away with bad charges, especially looking at that Intercontinental video. But I think the other view of this is going to be is that he was tried by a jury of his peers. All of the information, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and everything in between was shown to these 12 people, and they did not see the criminal enterprise. They did not see the force, fraud, and coercion. And I think the trafficking to engage in prostitution, I think that's going to be a lighter blemish on his career in terms of the totality of what we saw, as to like, okay, so he paid for people to go across state lines to have consensual sex. And I think consensual sex will be a big part of the conversation based on how the verdict came out. And so, do I think he takes a big knock in terms of this case? Yes, but we've seen Sean Combs rebrand and come back from a lot of things, and that is a possibility here.
But let's put it into the context, Aaron Katursky, of the Me Too movement. I don't think anybody can forget the video, the surveillance video that we saw over and over again in that hotel hallway of Sean Combs barely naked in a towel, kicking and dragging Cassie Ventura.
It's an unforgettable piece of video, and it was one of the most visceral pieces of evidence that the jury saw during the course of a nearly 2-month trial, Kira. and the defense really admitted what's depicted on it is domestic violence, but they said all along he's not charged with domestic violence. The defense insisted, even though the defense did not put on much of a case, called no witnesses, that what was depicted was not sex trafficking, and the jury seems to have agreed. And Sean Combs is clearly taking this outcome of a split verdict, guilty on only the transportation for the purposes of prostitution charges, as a win. The jury has been excused. As the 8 men and 4 women stood to leave their seats, Sean Combs made praying hands in their direction and bowed his head slightly as if to say thank you. When the outcome was read aloud in court, Combs put his hands in the air and looked to the ceiling, clearly taking this as a win that he was acquitted on the most serious charges he faced, Kira.
And now I understand, Aaron, his attorneys are calling for him to actually be released today. Could that happen?
Well, it could happen because he has already served about a year's time, a little shy of a year, and there will be a sentencing date. What the defense is likely arguing is that he is now no longer has anything to do with a violent crime. Transportation for the purposes of prostitution carries a maximum sentence of 10 years, a minimum of nothing. So it will be up to the judge to decide. But where he is no longer accused of a violent crime, the defense may have a good case to get him released until he is formally sentenced. If that happens, it's possible he could walk right out the golden doors here. Certainly a number of his supporters and others are waiting. Members of his family were certainly elated. They were not allowed to show any emotion, but they are remaining in the courtroom to see what happens, what the judge ultimately decides, Kira.
Brian, your thoughts on the fact that he could be released today?
So at the beginning of this case, when Sean Combs was charged with sex trafficking, that is a charge that has the assumption that someone should be held pending prosecution. That assumption is gone now because he's been found not guilty of those 2 charges. And to piggyback off what Aaron is saying, the severity of his punishment has greatly decreased. He's no longer looking at life. He's looking at a max of 10 years on each count. Some of that time he's already served while waiting for this case. Mark Ignifilo, the defense attorney who's leading this case, has said that his private plane is in Maui. He has no access to it. So he's hinting at the idea of a number of things that a judge will consider when thinking about bail. Is this person a flight risk? How serious of a sentence are they looking at? And flight risk goes into 2 portions. The actual ability to fly and not come back to the jurisdiction, but also the likelihood of doing that. A person who's facing life, more likely to be a flight risk. A person who's just beaten 3 of the 5 top counts in a trial like this and is only facing 10 years, far less of a flight risk. And so while I think it's somewhat of a Hail Mary for him to be released today, this is the strongest possible outcome that he could have had to make this argument. And I think the defense has a leg to stand on in making this argument that Sean Combs should be released pending the sentence.
Let me ask you, Brian, because you and I were talking for days about the videos, the just how explicit they were, how Sean Combs treated these women, listening to Cassie Ventura break down on the stand, listening to other women, former girlfriends, talk about the way he treated women. I brought this question to Aaron, but I want to ask you as well, as someone who's an attorney, someone who has been in the courtroom for cases that involve domestic violence, knowing what we know about what happened and how he treated these women, and now looking at this outcome, how he's been acquitted on the most serious charges, your overall thoughts moving forward about what this says about the Me Too movement, the power of a music mogul when he has money, when he has fame. Your thoughts?
So my thoughts, I think, I try to go beyond just being an attorney, and I'll try to sidestep that and just talk as a man, as an adult. I think there can be no mixing of words as to what Sean Combs is when it comes to the treatment of women. Full stop, period. There's no question as to what we saw in terms of the strength of the women who took the stand and testified about the abuse that happened to them. There's no question about the photos we saw of Cassie in terms of the bruising of her body, the bruising of her face, and the violence in that Intercontinental Hotel, full stop. There's no justification of that. There's no explanation of that. And I think in terms of the Me Too movement, there should be strength in the fact that those women were believed in terms of what they said. Putting my attorney hat back on for a moment, I think the difficulty of this and what may be perceived, and I hope it's a perception and not a reality, of the Me Too movement taking a step back based on this verdict, I think it comes from the overreaching of the government in this case, of trying to fit the allegations of this case into a RICO conspiracy, made it that much less palatable for the jury to take what they were saying to be true. And I think that might have also affected.
Now, this is very interesting here because if the prosecution wanted to really get a conviction, my question from the very beginning was, why would you have a RICO charge? This man is not a mobster. He's not running a criminal enterprise. They overcharged him. And the reason why they overcharged him, because they wanted to make sure that there was an outcry and rage coming from a potential jury among the public. And number two, they did it because politics was involved. Number three, individuals who are high profile, listen to this carefully, ladies and gentlemen, no matter who they are. Now, I'm not going to excuse what he did to Cassie Ventura. That's hideous. It's despicable. There's no place for it. And they should have charged him for it. But they never charged him with domestic violence. They should have charged him with the domestic violence in the first degree, but they never did it. That was one of their biggest mistakes. Instead, they went for racketeering, they went for sex trafficking, and they went for the RICO charge. And the reason why they did it, because it worked with R. Kelly. And they figured if it would work against R. Kelly, it most assuredly would work against Sean Diddy Combs. And the way that they arrested him, whether he was guilty or not, it was just all sloppy. The way they raided his homes, like they were coming down on the worst person in the history of the United States of America. And you know what? A lot of people said, we just don't like what they're doing. And you can believe when I'm telling you this. And the fact that he's a black man, you know how people feel about powerful black men being treated the way that these people treated him. Back to the video.
In some way, shape, or form, the trafficking as well. I'll be honest, I'm somewhat shocked that they did not find Sean Combs guilty of trafficking Cassie because of the violence there. But I think that they made a mistake of not understanding the difference between a brutal domestic violence relationship in which Sean Combs participated in and was in many regards an aggressor of, if not the absolute aggressor of, and trafficking. And I think the overreach and misapplication of what 12 people in the Southern District of New York, or what society would believe to be trafficking in RICO, that misstep and misperception is what led the SDNY here. The SDNY has phenomenal prosecutors, has a phenomenal office, and their record speaks for itself. But I think in this case, they overestimated the strength of their case, and this is what happens when a jury speaks.
Aaron, outside court, tell us about who you're seeing. How big of a crowd is it? The sense of the support, if indeed he does walk out of those golden doors, as you said, the type of support he will receive.
Well, out here now, Kira, there are, of course, a number of reporters, a number of bloggers who have been following the trial, curious onlookers, tourists, those in the park across the street doing their morning workout. But everyone is certainly curious whether Sean Combs is going to walk out those golden doors released on bail. His defense attorney, Mark Agnifilo, told the judge a moment ago Combs would be willing to put up $1 million bail to assure that he shows up for his sentencing. Federal prosecutors just opposed his release on bail, saying that he has committed a litany of crimes and there's no reason to believe he would do anything different if he is released now. Federal prosecutors believe Sean Combs still represents a danger and a risk of flight from justice. They point to the physical violence, even though he was not found guilty of sex trafficking nor charged with any physical violence. They say he has shown a predilection to committing physical violence, as the defense readily admitted. So prosecutors are opposing his release on bail. The judge is going to take a moment to decide.
Brian, your thoughts? Is Sean Combs a risk?
So the question is, a risk of what, right? Would I want Sean Combs to be around any girlfriends or women right now? No, because I think the allegations and the facts have showed that he is a toxic individual who could be very violent towards women. But if you're asking me as to whether or not he's a risk to not come back to court to be sentenced, maybe it's my bias as a defense attorney, and looking at this verdict now, I do not believe he's a risk to not come back to court. I think if anything, he is elated. He is happy. He's excited to come back to court to formulate the best argument for sentencing. And yes, he might spend some years in prison, but the amount of time that he would spend is far less than if he fled and never came back. And he has children here. He has enterprises here. He has at least 60 civil lawsuits that he has to fight. He has, in my mind, and maybe I'm making too strong of an application as a defense attorney, he has far more reasons to stay here and fight now after this verdict than to flee and never come back. And so, do I think he's going to get released? Probably not. That's a high bar to overcome, and I don't think the judge will allow that. But I think there is a very valid and strong argument that he is not a flight risk, and I think there's a possibility, albeit very small, that he walks out of those golden doors.
And Aaron, from what I understand, the judge has now said he is going to take his time to consider if indeed Sean Combs will be released today or not.
He will give a decision today, Kira, but the government and defense attorneys are asking for a period of hours so they can write letters, make their arguments on both sides. So it could be quite a while before the judge decides whether Sean Combs deserves to be released on bail. The government is making the case that he still faces up to 20 years in prison after his conviction on the 2 transportation for the purposes of prostitution charges. But the jury has cleared him of the most serious charges of sex trafficking and racketeering conspiracy that could have sent him to prison for life.
Brian, how do you think, what was it that defense lawyers did? What was it that they said? What was it that they had that you think helped deliver a victory for their client?
I think the case against Sean Combs was the first time, at least in me covering the Harvey Weinstein trial, where I was sitting in court, the R. Kelly trial, where I was sitting in court, and many of the cases that I think we would associate with the Me Too movement, where the defense was willing to say, my client is indefensible in some of his actions. That what he did and what you saw is wrong, but making the very strong distinction and walking the very tightrope of saying what he did wrong and what he's being accused of are 2 different things. What we've seen of people in the past of saying, well, they're all lying, you can't trust these women, you can't believe them. I think that's not a way to handle these cases. And I think what the defense did well is in talking to the human aspect of these are very messy relationships, that Sean Combs is an abuser. And Mark Agnifilo said it himself. If Sean Combs was accused of domestic violence, there would not be a trial because he would plead guilty. Do I think that's a bit of showmanship? Yes. Do I think that would actually be true? Maybe not. But I think arguing it nonetheless in front of a jury and admitting to some of the bad facts and trying to parse through it all, I think it gave them credibility to get to this verdict.
Let's bring in our Bernardo Villalona, who's been also with us as an attorney, as a contributor here at ABC News. You and I have been talking every day.
Let me ask a question before the video concludes. Why do you think he was found not guilty on the most serious charges, sex trafficking, the RICO charge, and human trafficking? Why do you think he was found not guilty? But he was found guilty on the prostitution charges. See, the prosecution, they keep making the same mistakes, even now as they're petitioning the judge to keep him locked up. They keep calling him a criminal. Well, you can call him a criminal all you want, but you all blew this case. You blew it. No matter how brilliant you are, no matter how articulate you are, you have to be persuasive as lawyers. I'm a criminal justice major. I know what I'm talking about. If you can't be persuasive to a jury is not going to believe you. It doesn't matter how many charges you have. You know? It doesn't matter how many charges you bring against somebody. It doesn't matter how many times you insult them and malign them and tear them down. You have to be able to prove each and every single element of the charge. It's just as simple. You have to layer it. Why are you charging him? What is the purpose for charging him? Can you prove that this man is guilty of running a criminal sexual enterprise that consists of racketeering and human sex trafficking? They weren't able to do that. And be careful, men, who you get involved with. Because in this age of Me Too, anybody can end up in the same position that Sean Diddy Combs is dealing with and facing right now. I really don't think he's going to do that much time on this prostitution charge, the 2 charges of prostitution. And if he does, he's not going to be up there in Rikers Island. Really, really major.
For months now about this case, Bernarda. I asked Brian this question as an attorney who has been involved with domestic violence cases. I want to ask you as well your thoughts on what this means for the victims.
For the victims, I think this is a slap in the face for the victims. I think this is going to deter victims from coming forward and telling their story and being the voice for the voiceless in the sense of representing other victims that are not willing to come forward. I know that for a fact, I'm sure that the prosecution right now is very upset with this verdict because they definitely put a lot of time into this prosecution, into this investigation. And they also did a lot of comforting of trying to give strength to these women, to Jane and to Cassie, to come forward, to show their face, to share their story. And this is not just like any other regular domestic violence case or just any type of abuse case. You're dealing that they were stepping forward to speak against a music mogul, a person who had the key to New York City, one of the most powerful people in the industry. So just think of how scared they were to come forward and to tell their story, and scared of what could happen once they came forward. Because I'm sure with social media and people talking in the news that they have received a lot of threats and people commenting about who they are and what they've done and that they are liars. But they and they alone know what happened to them. And they had prosecutors that believed in them and believed their story and became their voice.
Aaron, I understand court has now been adjourned. Combs was escorted out. A massive applause was heard from within the courtroom.
The judge said court is adjourned for now, Kira. He's going to give the parties until 1 p.m. Eastern Time to submit letters arguing for or against his release on bail. The judge left the bench until later on this afternoon when he'll give his decision. Once the judge was off the bench, Sean Combs was escorted out by the marshals. The judge told him he's going to have to cool his heels in the courthouse for a bit. But as he left the courtroom, there were applause from the gallery, some cheers in the gallery where members of his family have been in steadfast vigil His mother here most days, his twin daughters back, his sons have been here most days. They cheered for their father after he was acquitted of the most serious charges that he faces, still convicted of transportation for the purposes of prostitution, and now we await the decision as to whether he's going to be released on bail. If he is, he will walk out to a crowd that includes people holding up Sean John t-shirts and other supporters who have been here saying, "Where's the Rico?" They've been shouting that into the street for weeks, and they would certainly welcome this verdict if he is to walk out those golden doors, Kira. For the jury, they really had to make a difficult decision, not just on the racketeering conspiracy, but as the defense said, the women that Combs was accused of trafficking were also his long-term girlfriends. Cassie Ventura with him for 11 years, Jane with him for more than 3 years, and the defense tried to argue that they were consensual relationships, that they were in it just as much as he was because that was their lifestyle, even though they freely admitted the polyamorous swingers kink was not everybody's cup of tea. But he said these women were in it, and it required the jury to make distinctions between consent and coercion and love and control and free will, and in the end, they acquit on the most serious charges that carried a minimum sentence of 15 years, acquitting on sex trafficking in addition to the racketeering conspiracy, Kira.
Bernard, I want to bring you back in on that. As Aaron was saying, this really came down to violence.
All right, I'm going to leave it right there. You've been watching Tyrone Bowman Live coverage of provided by ABC News. Sean Diddy Combs has been found not guilty of sex trafficking, racketeering, and the RICO charge. But he has been found guilty on 2 charges of prostitution, across-state prostitution. I will be back later on once the judge reaches his decision regarding whether Mr. Combs is going to be out on bail pending sentencing. So until then, thank you for watching. Never surrender, never quit.